Time now for our regular conversation. An American in Oz. NBC's Sarah James joins us each time. She now calls Australia home, and after the announcement last week of Toyota's impending exit from Australia, Sarah has a tale of two cities.
Yes, in fact, I think what most people think of when they think, Virginia, about the demise of jobs here and manufacturing jobs going elsewhere, they think, what's going to happen? How do we avoid the fate of Detroit? And this, of course, is the concern because everybody knows that that city has gone from a population of well over 1 million up to 1.8 at one point, down to 700,000 jobs. It's been terrible. And yet the car manufacturing companies are actually profitable again. So there is, however, a city that's done it really, really well. And that city was the home of steel. U.S. Steel, indeed, was based there, as were other steel companies. And now the only thing that you would know in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that would let you know this was once the home of steel is the NFL franchise, which is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Of course. Yes, and while we're bragging, by the way, they've won more championships than any other American city. So at any rate, what is it that Pittsburgh has done? And they have diversified. They have a city now that is vibrant. They have a low unemployment rate. They have companies like Google and Intel, and they have huge robotics. So how have they done it? So I had an opportunity. I talked to Ed Blakely from the U.S. Studies Center, who's an expert in urban policy, and I talked to him about how Pittsburgh avoided the fate of Detroit. Here's what he said.
Well, when the steel plants closed, Pittsburgh didn't die. What they did was they looked at a trained workforce. These were hardworking people, and they started retraining them on the job before the plants actually closed into new industries, the robotics industry, new technologies, automated manufacturing and the like. And that transformed the city. It kept the workers going, and it's made Pittsburgh a city, a global city in industrial development and manufacturing. Unlike Detroit, Pittsburgh decided to diversify into the industries of the future and make investments in those. So Pittsburgh is a stronger city than what is, but the city center of Pittsburgh is not a steel center anymore. It is now a cultural center, an art center, an entertainment center, and a sports center. It's thriving, growing, and strong.
This is a really interesting example of what placemakers, which they're described now, sort of the new branch of urban developers and town planners. It's a good example of the theoretical actually translating into the actual. You hear again and again about these towns where, okay, we've actually got a skilled workforce. Why don't we just migrate them into the new technologies? And not many towns actually manage to do it. So how Pittsburgh did that is actually the real question, isn't it here?
Spot on, because how they did it was what they call their EDs and MEDs. And by that I mean they took their education base, which is very strong. This is a home to a number of universities, including Carnegie Mellon. And they worked, the people in the steel industry and other industries worked with those education centers and also with the medical centers. And together, that's how they made their way out of this. They made it very clear, and Ed and I talked about this, the city can't go it alone. There needs to be that sense of cooperation and figuring out what the jobs are and then positioning yourself with training the workforce through education to get there.
Well, what has worked clearly in Pittsburgh, is that translatable to Australia? Can we have lessons over here?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, and I asked Ed that. I said, so what is it that they've done and how could we do it here? Here's what he had to say.
There are a lot of lessons for Australia. First of all, we have to get the universities doing the same thing they did in Pittsburgh. What they did was created an industrial outreach program. Like the agricultural extension, we started an industrial extension. That program helped the existing industries focus on the future. It helped new industries arise, and it put the university's technology and techniques in making a better place.
Ed Blakely there with you again. It's interesting, we know that he mentioned earlier the centre of the city became a cultural centre, so there's sort of two prongs to the whole thing. There's the educated workforce and the new jobs they're going to, and turning the city centre into something else. That happened in Newcastle, of course, in New South Wales, with the exit of, steel-making industries there. And that's become a great example of how you can rejuvenate a city centre culturally and the jobs that are associated with that, and the industries and the businesses that come.
Well, and it's crucial crucial because what it means is that it makes people want to come back to the city.
Yes.
I mean, Pittsburgh has seen its population actually grow for the first time since the 1950s, and that's because, like Newcastle, they've done things downtown to make it more attractive.
Yeah.
It's also important to note that some of this Australia is already doing. So I also asked Ed, what are the things that are already happening here that could be jobs for the future? Here's what he said.
Australia already has the leading edge in certain areas. New materials, the kind of materials that the new aircraft are being made of. We're a leader there. We're a leader in many of the solar technologies and techniques. We're a leader in building systems. You see that in Melbourne with the buildings on the skyline that are assembled from the ground up. Those building technologies are going to be needed in Asia. They are an export. And of course, we're a leader in all kind of prosthesis and medical devices and the like. We have to scale those up so that we can export them globally.
Yeah, the medical industry is part of it. It's a really interesting aspect too, as he says, particularly in Melbourne. So why is it then that cities don't do it and a city like Detroit ends up filing for bankruptcy?
Oh, well, that's a fascinating situation because I think what happened there was they didn't have as much of the education aspect. I mean, certainly they have universities, but they didn't have that same sort of cooperation between the various institutions that they've had here.
Yeah.
And it really was a one-industry town. There wasn't sort of the planning forward. But here's something that's interesting to note. The new mayor has said, give us 6 months. They've got a big bankruptcy deadline coming up on March 1st. Things are starting to happen in Detroit. So in a strange way, the bankruptcy has actually, I think people are now saying, been good for Detroit, and that the city don't count it out. Because we saw what happened with Pittsburgh. We're talking about a city with 17% unemployment.
Wow.
Look at it today. It doesn't have to be over for Detroit, and it certainly brings hope here for things that could happen in the future as well.
That's really fascinating. Great conversation. Thanks so much for joining us today, Sarah.
Welcome. Thank you.
you.